Welcome to Khanversations. I'm Muqtedar, your host, and today I'm going to talk to you about fragmentation of international cooperation. Now, what do I mean by fragmentation of international cooperation? What I mean is that since 1945, after the end of the World War, a set of institutions emerged, which is what we also call as the liberal global order, designed to improve cooperation between countries and also reduce conflict and also try and resolve conflict if it exists using these multilateral institutions like the United Nations, the Security Council. There are a plethora of international organizations, literally thousands of them out there, which are enabling, facilitating, increasing, managing, and organizing international cooperation. There is a lot of international cooperation taking place in the world. But we are going through a period where there is a weakening of the liberal international order, weakening of these institutions. There's loss of credibility of institutions like the UN Security Council. Some of them are proving to be dysfunctional and ineffective. And so there is a fragmentation taking place. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about with the emergence of new forms of institutions that enable new ways of cooperation. So I'm going to talk to you about multilateralism. I'm going to talk to you about bilateralism. I'm going to talk to you about and other forms of cooperation that have emerged in the past few years. But before I get into the nitty-gritties, please subscribe to Khanversations, like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share this video with your socio-political network. And if you would like to support the work that we do at Khanversations, do consider to become a member by joining the channel. So you have to press the button that says join, and you can support Khanversations. So if you were to look at the world during the Cold War, the world was clearly divided. It was a bipolar system. The world was divided into a part of the world that was led by the United States and its allies and NATO. And then there was the Warsaw Pact, the Soviet Union and its allies. The world was basically divided into a capitalist world and a communist world. Of course, there was the third world, the non-aligned nations, which were about 100 at that time. International cooperation happened in fragments then too. For example, there was a lot of cooperation both in terms of security and trade within the US ecosystem. There was a lot of cooperation in terms of trade and security in the Soviet ecosystem. The non-aligned nations talked a lot about South-South trade, for example. But nevertheless, even though they did have the non-aligned movement, it was more rhetorical than real. And so there was not much cooperation between the global South, what we call the global South now. And so either countries were more aligned with the Soviet Union or more aligned with the United States. But there was also a common system. The United Nations was there, the World Bank was there, the IMF was there, and some countries, mostly from the global South, definitely participated in these international multilateral institutions. Then as we approached and the collapse of the Soviet Union, and then we entered the unipolar era of the US domination. So basically, if you look at the world today, you will find four types of cooperation taking place in the world. One is bilateral. Bilateral is relations between two countries. And so, for example, a lot of strategic and technological cooperation is taking place between India and the United States. Sometimes through Quad and sometimes outside, is called strategic comprehensive strategic partnership. So you can see two countries cooperating with each other, not under the umbrella of any international organization, but just mutual agreements. This is the most common form of international cooperation that has been practiced even before the nation-state system. There were empires that cooperated, kingdoms that they cooperated. Either you cooperated or you had conflict with your neighbors, and often they were in bilateral systems. Multilateralism is a more recent phenomenon developed and encouraged by the United States after it became the predominant power, the hegemon in the world after the end of the World War II. So the second form of cooperation which you see is multilateralism. Multilateralism means many countries are participating, and some of the best examples, like I said, are World Bank, IMF, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, etc. The goal of multilateral institution is essentially to bring everybody under the umbrella, every country under the umbrella of that particular organization, and promote cooperation on a global scale. In fact, in the past few decades, the United Nations has also expanded to include non-state actors. So you find a lot of international government organizations and non-government organizations participating under the same umbrella and participating in the same process of multilateral cooperation. So you have three tiers, essentially. You have nation states, you have governmental organizations, non-governmental organizations. You can also even have regional organizations cooperating under the umbrella of the multilateral system. And then of late, we found that because multilateral institutions have become very dysfunctional, United Nations Security Council has become absolutely useless. The veto powers of some countries, which are used shamelessly against the very rules that they are supposed to uphold, has basically made UN Security Council useless. For example, if you look at the war in Iraq, if you look at the war in the Middle East, if you look at the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, the UN Security Council had no role to play. And so increasingly on issues which are global in scale when it comes to security, these institutions are beginning to fail. Plus, it has become a bit difficult to approach global problems which are increasing, from pandemics to the environment to wars which are disrupting global supply chains. Multilateral institutions which are global in scale have become very difficult to manage, even when there is agreement that there is a problem that needs to be addressed. So as a result of that, great powers decided to start a new trend of minilateralism. So for example, you have G7, where the world's seven most richest countries, which are also liberal democracies, come together and try to cooperate on some issues of mutual interest as well as global interests. And because they are so big in terms of economic strength, the rules that they make for trade or otherwise sort of become norms for the rest of the world. So it becomes easy especially for the unipolar state, the United States, to handle global issues in partnership with 6 other countries which share its economic and its political values. So some of the decisions that are made by G7, most other countries tend to have to abide by them. Otherwise, they tend to suffer because most of the powerful countries are part of this minilateral system of G7 countries. And then, of course, you have a slightly bigger but far more effective, which is the G20, which handled the crisis of 2008 in such an incredible way. So you have G20, which brings in the world's top 20 economies. So these are only 20 countries with the European Union, but they also control over 80% of the global GDP. So G20 is another example of minilateralism. And then you see that countries which are quite unhappy with the existing global order are also creating minilateral institutions such as BRICS and the SCO, for example. But the point is that at some point there are internal conflicts even within these minilateral institutions. And so countries are then moving towards what I call as microlateralism, even though a lot of people use the word minilateralism for it. I like to use the word microlateralism to talk about, say, Quads, the Quad that the United States, Japan, India, and Australia have formed to deal with the rise of China in the Indo-Pacific region. The Quad that India, Israel, UAE, and the US, UAE, India, and Israel. I2U2 is also a Quad which tries to promote, basically tries to promote Israel in the Middle East and rest of the world. But there are other microlateral institutions like AUKUS, the Five Eyes, and then there are all these trilateral arrangements. There's the Squad with US, Japan, Australia, and Philippines. And then there is a trilateral arrangement between the United States, Japan, and South Korea. What these microlateral arrangements do is they acknowledge the fact that the hegemon or the unipolar state, the United States, is unable to achieve consensus on a regional level. And that's because it's being challenged by the United States. All of these attempts at microlateralism are from West Asia to East Asia. And what the United States is unable to do is to find common ground with all the countries in the region, because many of them are trading with China and have close relations with China. So it finds common ground like, oh my God, the threat of North Korea. So let's work with South Korea and Japan, or look at the threat of China to borders. So let's work with India, and so on and so forth. So microlateralism is an acknowledgement that the hegemon is unable to build regional consensus, but does have shared interests with a few set of countries, and is willing to work on that narrow interest. So the bandwidth of the interest is narrow. And because it's a smaller number of states which are coming together primarily because they have very strong shared interests, I think microlateralism will be a very effective way in handling problems which are local, maybe partly regional, but not global in scale. So I think more and more countries will resort to microlateralism. India is trying to create an alternative. It's called BISTEC or something, alternative to SAR, which was a South Asian Regional Cooperation Organization. So they're trying to create an alternative without Pakistan in it. So more and more regional powerhouses will try to create or find allies who share their interest on a very narrow bandwidth, and will try to create small instances of international cooperation. So these are the four types of institutions that exist there. They are multilateral, bilateral, minilateral, and microlateral. And here are some examples of those. So if you look at bilateral, obviously any set of countries you can take as examples. The United States and Mexico working to combat flow of drugs from Mexico into the US, or flow of undocumented migrants, etc., is one good example of bilateral cooperation. Multilateralism is obviously well known, the United Nations, World Bank, IMF, etc. And then you have minilateral institutions like the BRICS, SCO, G7, G20. And then you have microlateral institutions like the Five Eyes, AUKUS, Quads, and trilaterals. So what is really happening is that we are witnessing a fragmentation of international cooperation. I also think that even institutions which are so-called minilateral institutions like the BRICS and SCO, as they expand, or if players within those groups are dysfunctional, such as India-China's relations in BRICS as well as in SCO, is going to, the lack of, or the rivalry between India and China in BRICS as well as in SCO is going to reduce the effectiveness of both those organizations. And so it's quite possible at some point you will see that China probably is going to resolve to microlateralism. You can see that China disappointed with the role that India is playing in SCO. SCO was basically supposed to be China and Central Asia, then Russia was added, and then Russia and China brought in India and Pakistan. Now Iran is also there now, and Belarus is also there. So they have about 10 members now. And they're not always seeing eye to eye. So China last year started another similar SCO-like organization, China Plus 5 or China Plus 4, where it is dealing with China, directly dealing with the Central Asian countries on a regular basis, creating a microlateral system, excluding Russia and India from it, even though they are part of BRICS as well as SCO. So I think that we are witnessing this. There are dangers to this fragmentation. And Geeta Gopinath, who is the #2 economist at the International Monetary Fund, has repeatedly warned that geopolitical fragmentation will lead to a fragmentation in the global economy. So you will see a division, like groupings of which will undermine globalization and the oneness of the global economy, resulting in factions. And you can see that with the idea of friendshoring, which is undermining cost-based offshoring of manufacturing and other services. And she argues that in the short run, we will see a decline of 7% in the global GDP as a result of this fragmentation. So I think that the growth rates of countries, as well as the growth rate of the global economy, will be hurt because of this fragmentation of cooperation. So I'm going to stop with that. So if you like this video, please share it with your socio-political network. Don't forget to subscribe to Khanversation, like this video, and please join and become a member to support Khanversations. Until next time, I'm your host, Muqtedar Khan. Take care.